Welcome to Lead Your Life, the podcast for people who are seeking harmony in business and in life. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I'm an inner mastery and business mindset coach and the chief igniter here at the Lit Up Life. I feel an urgency to help people let go of past messaging so that they can make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what they value most. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity. It's a place, another land.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. Excuse me, I'm still fighting this cold just a little bit, but my name is Debbie Heiser, and I help entrepreneurs make a lot of money doing what they love to do without sacrificing what's important to them. I find for me, my passion and the importance of what I do is to help people lead a lit up life. And so it's not just focusing on the business, not just focusing on finances, but all of those areas in our lives. What do we do to play? What do we do to have fun? So today I'm going to talk a little bit more about brain science. In the last solo episode that you heard my story about how I had kind of gotten hit over the side of the head with a 2x4 and being in alignment. And that's a key piece. But I want to talk a little bit about how our brains work. I mentioned the conscious and subconscious brain in the last episode. And it's simply where our conscious brain can accept or reject messages and create and innovate. Very simplistic from a neuroscience perspective, and that our subconscious can only receive messages. So our subconscious receives these messages, and even as early on as 2 or 3, we receive these messages about how to stay in the tribe, right? And then now, like when I was a kid, we weren't thinking globally because we didn't have access to see things as global until I was a little bit older and saw things in the newspaper. And then as I got older, and it seems like now as the internet, I'm aging myself here, has exploded more, we have a more global view. And so the acceleration of that is happening much faster with kids. So we're getting these messages, and early on, knowing that certain things will provide us. So like as a young child, knowing that if I cry, someone will respond to me, right? And they don't care at that point in time. They don't have anything to compare things to because they haven't organized thoughts into words yet. However, they're still observing and they're realizing things that will help or harm in the future. And so one of the things that as we look at this neuroscience, those messages that come into our head then create this belief. And then this belief turns into the actions that we take, and the actions then create the habits that we have. You know, in the book Atomic Habits, he talks about that a lot of times too, when we're looking at those habits, we're not getting to the root of the issue. And so therefore, we're not making lasting change. Where if you get to the root of the issue, and a lot of this has to do with this idea too, that when we get to the message and where it came in as a belief, if we can change that core belief, then we see life-altering change happen, right? So that's kind of a shortened version of the neuroscience piece of it. And what I'm excited to talk about today then is when we think about moving forward in our businesses, in our careers, when we think about moving forward in relationship, whatever it is, it's important to know and understand, because really my goal is to help us, not only do the things that I mentioned before, but to help people have freedom. One of my mentors, Peter Crone, talks about that, and how creating freedom means uncovering some of those messages. And we have this inner family in our head that it was taught to me as what's called transactional analysis. If you Google transactional analysis, it comes up a little different. If you look up family systems, you'll find more information about this. And so I want to talk about those 4 roles how they create messages, because you're not only dealing with what you think is yourself in there, but there's 4 different potential hats that you're wearing, and you can walk through and hit every single one of these in 10 seconds or less. So I'm going to break it down for you. And if you've listened in the past, excuse me, I've talked about this before, but it's such an important concept that I keep coming back to it. So when we think about these people in our head, I want you to think about almost like you have a couch in your head. And in one side of this couch is a small young child. So if I think about my grandson, and we're expecting, so hopefully by the time you hear this podcast in July, my next grandson will be born. But regardless of that, when we have our young child and you think about a toddler, so my one grandson is 3 years old, and he is so funny because now we just have a thing where we look at each other and I start to giggle and he just starts to laugh and laugh and laugh. We do a lot of laughing together. And so he's all emotion. But then as we're playing Hungry Hippos, he's laughing, but all of a sudden I get the one ball that's a different color and he's mad. He's like, "Stop it, Grandma," or "Gaga, stop it." And he gets angry, right? And we talk through it, but then there's other times he'll be sad, and they're like all emotion, right? So this is a little bit before 3, but they're all emotion and they're super creative, right? Like I have to laugh because a friend of mine who is my daughter-in-law's mother owns a preschool, and she talks about sometimes the stories, like the things that kids will say because they're so creative. And so when we tap into that little person, we're tapping into our heart, right? And there's some vulnerability there, but also creativity. And we as business owners, we as career-minded people, there's usually things talking about innovation and how we need to be innovative and creative. Well, all that is imagination. And when we're little, we foster that imagination. Now, not to go too off topic, but a lot of times some of our systems that we have set up kind of squash that creativity and then squashes our ability to play. Example, I deal with this all the time myself, and I've learned from it and grown from it and have helped other people with this, where we hear these messages when we're younger that says, "Finish your chores before you go play. Finish your homework before you go play." Well, we as business owners, our work is never done. So if we live by that belief, then it makes it really hard for us to go play, for us to go have fun. And then we start to get into our head and think, "Oh, if we're having fun, I should be more productive." Right? Like, and we go into more of these like adult things, which really is a critical parent. And that's on the other end of the couch. And there's somebody in between them. But on the other end of the couch is this critical parent. Now, I'm not suggesting it's your parents, but it's you parenting yourself. Now, we gain a lot of these messages, right? Around, I have clients all the time say, "Well, I don't want to be lazy. I don't want to I know I should be doing more for this." And I always ask, according to whom, right? Like we're setting that up. I've had people say to me, "I feel a lot of pressure from my spouse to make more money." And coming into the conversation, I'll be like, "Now, have they said something to you that gives you that impression? Are they doing some actions that give you that impression?" And 99% of the time, it's ourself putting pressure on ourselves, implied, like we're implying that it's someone else, which then says we're not taking responsibility, right? We're not being a mature adult about it. So that critical parent gets in there and says, "Oh, you should do this." And many of you have maybe heard me say this. When you hear yourself shoulding on yourself, that's a sure sign. Or when I hear people say, "I'm my own worst critic," well, yeah, that's your inner critic coming out. And so now the other piece with that parent is the critical parent, and then there's the over nurturing parent. And I don't talk about this one as much, but this over nurturing parent is where we overdo it, right? I was reading an article the other day that like 80% of young people that are interviewing for corporate jobs, their parents are coming to the interviews. I'm sorry, but if I'm graduated college and I'm in my 20s, it is time like to let them go have an interview and adults, right? And here's what's interesting. That's a Debbie opinion. You may or may not agree with me, but coming from corporate, if somebody would have brought their parents, that would have told me that they didn't have the discipline and the trust in themselves to do the job and do it well. So anyway, right, wrong, or indifferent, part of this has happened because we've extended adolescence. And the adolescent is what we're going to talk about next, but we're going to take a short break and then I'll come back and talk more about the adolescent and the mature adult. Are you a woman who's worn out from wearing all the hats that we wear and you're really ready for a break? Well, join us for an empowering experience in beautiful Sandpoint, Idaho from October 24th to the 27th. This exclusive retreat is designed for women just like you. The Cast Your Vision retreat will have transformative workshops, expert guidance and coaching from me, and a supportive community to hold your hand along the way. Don't miss this opportunity to invest in yourself and your future. Get crystal clear on who you want to be and make that dream into a reality. Register today with the link in the show notes. Hope to see you there. Okay, and we're back. And we were talking about how we have this over nurturing parent. And so we've got our young person that's all emotion, that is open, creative, doesn't really care what other people think. But a lot of us have kind of put them to rest. I used to joke that, which wasn't very nice, but I joked, excuse me, that she was kind of like Harry Potter and I had locked her underneath the stairs because it took a lot for me to play. And I can always tell when I start to get out of alignment with myself because I'm not playing. I'm not doing things that make me laugh, or somebody will say something really funny and I'll say, oh, that was funny. And then I don't laugh, right? Like that's a sure sign that I'm in my sympathetic. I'm not in my rest and relaxation, but in more of a stressed out mode. So then this critical parent, the shoulding, then the over nurturing parent is someone that has good intentions, right? It's not that we're trying to do things that have a connotation to them. We're trying to be helpful. We're trying to nurture our young children. We're trying to, nurture our adolescent, our middle school and high school kids, or even college kids. But ultimately what happens is when we come in and rescue, not only is that codependency, but when we come in and rescue, or we come in and try to help them and we swoop in with great intentions to help assist them, really what we're saying to them is that we don't trust that they have the ability to make that decision themselves, that we don't trust that they can do that job, or we don't think that they can do what we're asking them to do or someone else is asking them to do. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't feel so hot, right? Now, we all do it. I tease my best friend who's a counselor that she has job security because we all do things. I had things that my parents did innocently that I interpreted one way, and after unwinding some of these things, see where it potentially hurt me in my adult life. And so it's about unlocking those things because really they're just words, right? And we create the issue around it. So this over nurturing parent is that parent that isn't willing to let go. And you have to ask yourself, if you're in a parenting role like that, and then we're going to talk about our own inner head with this. If you're in that parenting role where you're over nurturing your children, what are you getting out of it? Right? You might be getting stability. You might be getting, maybe you're in a relationship where you don't feel a lot of love between you and your spouse or your relationship. But you feel that love from your child, right? And so it's a really hard question sometimes to look at the answer, but what are you gaining from over nurturing or not allowing that separation? I talk about, from the moment my son left my body and I gave birth, it has been a lesson in letting go. And there have been different times, kindergarten, he gets on the bus. He's like, no, don't be overzealous and hug me and do all this. You can wave at me, because we all met at the daycare, right? Or the Tammy Duncan's house, who was our phenomenal preschool teacher. And we watched them all get on the bus and we waved at them and, crying, thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to kindergarten. But that was a step in letting go. Then throughout time, like as my son became more of an adolescent, as he became more of an adult, like letting him make those decisions, we did things a little bit differently than some people did. And neither one of them were right or wrong, but my son never had a curfew. We sat down when he and his friends, now I also trusted his friends and knew his friends' parents very well, but we would sit down. Now, that doesn't mean he hasn't done some things. There's been some things I've found out later in life, now that he's in his 30s, that I'm like, oh, okay. But ultimately at the time, it was about building trust. And so we would have a conversation about what was the appropriate time for him to be home. And, sometimes he'd try to push the limit. And in Missouri, it was against the law if you were 16 to 18, I think, to be out after a certain time frame. And so we would come to a negotiated time. And I had one of those old fashioned alarm clocks, the round ones with the bells on it. And I would set the alarm clock and set it right outside my door, because if the alarm went off, then he wasn't meeting his curfew. But if the alarm didn't go off, that meant he shut it off. Now, he could have been sneaky and shut it off and left again, but he didn't. It was a trust thing, and that's what we talked about. And so when you think about that over nurturing parent, I taught him. Now, I'm tooting my own horn here a little bit because my human has turned out really well. He's a super awesome man. And, taught him that trust was important. And it doesn't mean that there weren't times that trust wasn't broken, because there were, but it was then building upon that. And so when I look at that, yeah, were there things I over nurtured him on? Absolutely. And my sisters will tell you absolutely, because it was kind of cute, because my youngest sister was like, oh, when I have a kid, I'm going to do this. And now that she has a kid, she's doing some of the same things. So it's kind of humorous to me, calling you out there. But ultimately, when you look at that over nurturing parent, I told my son, it's my job to create you as an adult that is able to function in the world. He started doing his own laundry at 11 because I got tired of washing clean clothes because they never got put away. So it's about like making sure you're not over nurturing. Well, that same thing holds true in your own head, right? Like giving yourself all these excuses. Now, I'm not saying don't absolutely give grace to yourself. Absolutely listen to your body, listen to those things. But if you start to do some things and your critical parent comes out, oh, you're being lazy, you should be doing X, Y, and Z, note that and say, thank you very much for trying to keep me safe, but I need for you to kind of sit over here because I'm learning a new pattern here. But if we're staying in that as an excuse and we're over nurturing ourselves, then we have to look at that too. So then in the center is this adolescent. Now, most of us live in our adolescence, although we like to think we live in our mature adults. On our adolescent, now all of these have positive things, right? Our critical parent, over nurturing parent is trying to keep us safe. Our young person is providing us to be relevant in our emotions and to be creative. And our adolescent is the one that has the courage, has the resiliency, has the risk taking. And so our adolescent also, though, can be that one that gets a little sassy and can try to take over and start to get into the victim game a little bit and all of those kinds of things. Now, when you start to justify what you're doing and why, when you try to like come in and, oh, I'm so sorry, I had this and this and this, then that's your adolescent speaking, right? And so it's just good to be aware, but also be able to step back and go, oh, isn't that interesting how that comes out again, right? Like there are certain things that at times will trigger me, and I find that when that happens, my adolescent is out, and so it's like, what's the trigger? And then I start to unwind that. The mature adult, their role, because the adolescent sits between that critical parent and that young child. So they're trying to protect the young child from being criticized all the time, from feeling like there's nothing that they can do that's right, and allowing for that. They're taking that, right? So no wonder they get sassy sometimes and they get burnout, they get like tired and worn out. And the mature adult's job is to say, critical parent, please sit down. We appreciate you trying to keep us safe. I've got this. I'm going to take into account how I feel about this. I'm going to take into account about if I need some courage to step into something, but I'm going to respond and not react. And, it takes practice when we're used to being in one of those other three. A sure tell sign too that I'm in one of those three on a more consistent basis is because I fall into the victim game and I fall into victim mode. And there's some blatant things that happen with that, but then there's also some really subtle things that go on with that as well. And so one time someone said something to me at an Al-Anon meeting and said, you can't play tug of war if you don't pick up the rope. And that's an example of a mature adult saying, I'm not going to argue about something. And some of you have heard me say before, like when you know who you are, you can come and without judgment say, you know what, whoever this is, I'm just going to use a name. Diane, thank you so much for asking me to help out with X, Y, and Z. I'm just not available right now, but thank you for asking. Now, that doesn't come off as judgment or anything, and I'm not resentful because I'm not doing something that I really don't want to do or have the capacity or time to do. And so I'm being honest and being truthful with people in a way that's not judgmental, but it's because I know who I am. I have clarity about what I want my life to look like, and I don't want to be busy, busy, busy all the time. A lot of times I'll correct people when they say, oh, you have a really busy schedule. Well, I have a lot going on. Yes. And I choose that, but then I also am choosing like what I'm doing in my time and hanging out with people that I want to hang out with. So, knowing yourself allows you then to go back and forth and utilize those four roles as, information and data points so that you can go into your mature adult, make decisions, go forward with things. So just like I had mentioned before, where I knew I was out of alignment, I really looked at that, kind of figured out where that was coming from, and then stepped into a different way. And I'm still doing the work that I've done, but I've just looked at it a little differently because we also have to be open to receive. We have to be open to receive whatever it is in a way that we may not be anticipating. So with that, I'm going to call it a wrap. And if you have any questions or want to talk about this more, please go out and sign up for a clarity call. It's really a connection time for us to have a chat, and do us a solid and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment on this episode if you so choose. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for each and one of you for tuning in today. Everyone have a fabulous day. That's a wrap for this conversation. I'm so glad you've joined us. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you can catch all of our future episodes, and visit us at thelituplife.com for details on how you can become part of the Lit Up Life community. A quick shout out to my friend Jackie Wilson and her friends, the creators of our amazing theme music. Thanks so much for allowing us to share this perfect song with our listeners. Looking forward to having you listen in to our next episode.
See the